Beamy Cole, 35, engineer, the boring kind that fixes things nobody thinks about until they break. Married 9 years to a woman named Skylar. For most of those years, it worked. Or, I thought it did. I paid the mortgage, kept both cars running, handled the taxes, the gutters, the dead garbage disposal at midnight, cooked on weekends because she liked when I cooked, never raised my voice, never gambled, never disappeared, never gave her a reason to check my phone. If you'd asked me back then, I'd have said we were solid. Turns out solid and stuck look the same from the inside if you stop paying attention. We met young. She was funny then, the kind of funny that catches you off guard, and she'd actually listen when I talked about work even though none of it made sense to her. The early years were good. Cheap apartment, takeout on the couch, arguing about which movie to watch and not about whether I was secretly a bad person. She used to leave little notes in my lunch. I still don't know when she stopped, only that one day I noticed they'd been gone a long time. Somewhere along the way she stopped being that Skylar and started being whatever the phone told her to be that week. It didn't happen overnight. These things never do. First it was the podcasts. She'd have one playing while she made coffee, some woman with a soft voice talking about reclaiming your power. Then the reels. Endless reels. She'd lie in bed scrolling, and the blue light would hit her face for 2 hours straight while I was already half asleep beside her. I didn't say anything. Figured it was a phase, like the essential oils phase, like the year she only ate raw food and our kitchen smelled like a compost bin. Looking back, I gave a lot of things a pass because saying nothing was easier than starting something. One of her friends got really into all of it around that time. I won't name her, doesn't matter, she's not the point of this. This friend had left her own husband the year before and turned the divorce into a whole personality. Posted constantly about how leaving was the bravest thing she ever did, how she'd been asleep in her marriage and finally woke up. Skylar started quoting her, then started talking like her, then started looking at me the way you look at a piece of furniture you're thinking about replacing. The two of them would have these long phone calls where Skylar's voice would drop low and careful the second I walked into the room. Nothing makes you feel like a stranger in your own house faster than your wife going quiet when you appear. I tried bringing it up gently once, asked if everything was okay between us, if there was something I could do better. She said I wouldn't understand because I'd never had to do the work on myself. Whatever the work was, it apparently had a price tag and a waiting list. The retreats she came back from always left her talking like a brochure for a week. Words like boundaries and capacity and holding space, used in ways that mostly seemed to mean she didn't want to do anything she used to do. Date night got rebranded as a thing that drained her energy. Cooking together became me imposing my need for control on the kitchen. Even asking how the retreat went got me a lecture about how she didn't owe me a report on her healing. The vocabulary changed first. That was the early warning I missed completely. Things I'd always done suddenly had new names. Me handling the money because I'm an engineer and I like spreadsheets became financial control. Me staying calm during arguments instead of screaming became emotional unavailability. Me asking where we were going when she booked a trip without telling me became controlling. I genuinely didn't recognize the guy she was describing. He sounded like a villain. I was a guy who fell asleep during the news with a dog on my feet. There was a night she told me, completely seriously, that she'd been reading about toxic masculinity, and she thought I might have a lot of it under the surface. I asked her for an example, a real one, something I actually did. She couldn't give me one, just said it was more of an energy. An energy. 9 years, and I'd apparently been radiating something she could only detect once a stranger online taught her the word for it. We had one real fight about it, maybe the only real one near the end. I told her I felt like I was on trial in my own marriage, defending myself against crimes nobody could name. She said the fact that I was getting defensive proved the point. That's a neat little trap if you think about it. Stay calm, you're cold and unavailable. Push back, you're proving you're toxic. There's no move that counts as innocent. For a while, I tried to fix it the way I fix everything, by working harder at it. I cooked more, asked more questions about her day, suggested we go out, just the two of us, no phones. None of it counted. Effort from a man she'd already decided was the problem just looked like manipulation to her by then. The harder I tried, the more controlling I supposedly was. There's no winning that game, and it took me too long to see I was even playing it. The trip started after that. Weekend retreats at first. She'd come back glowing, talking about breathwork and shadow work and a community of women who finally got her. The retreats got longer and more expensive each time. I noticed the savings account thinning, but I told myself she was happy, and a happy wife was worth a few $1,000s. That's the thing about being the reliable guy. You keep paying because paying is the only language you know. Every retreat she came home a little more distant. The woman who left for the weekend and the woman who came back were never quite the same person anymore. By the end, she barely talked to me. We lived in the same house like two people sharing a hotel by accident. She started sleeping in the guest room, said she needed her own space to do her inner work. I let her have it, because what else was I going to do, beg? The last few months under the same roof, we were basically roommates who used to be in love. I'd say good morning and get a nod. I'd ask about dinner and get a shrug. The dog got more warmth out of her than I did, and I wasn't even jealous, just tired. Money kept leaking out the whole time. A course here, a crystal there, a deposit on something I'd find out about after the fact. I'd stopped questioning it because questioning it was controlling, and I'd learned my lines well enough by then to know which ones cost me. The night it actually broke is burned into me, even if I couldn't tell you the exact date. It was a weeknight, I'd worked late, came home, expected dinner, or at least the TV on. Instead, the lights were dim, and she had a candle going on the kitchen table. Not a romantic candle, a set the mood for a serious conversation candle. She told me to sit down. I sat. And then she said the line, the one I've heard other men describe and never thought I'd live through myself. Cole, I love you, but I've lost myself in this marriage. I need to go find her. Find her? Find who? I asked who exactly we were looking for. Myself, she said. She'd lost herself somewhere in our 9 years. I pointed out calmly that she was sitting right in front of me, fully visible, not lost at all. She didn't laugh. People who've fully drunk it down don't laugh anymore. They just look at you with this patient sadness, like you're the one who doesn't get it. The plan came out in pieces over the next hour. She was going to take a sabbatical from us. Her words, like our marriage was a job with paid leave. She'd already booked a long stay overseas, Bali, eventually, but a few stops first. There was a coach involved, a man named Devin. She'd found him through the retreat circle. He ran programs for women stepping into their next chapter. I asked how much all of this cost. She got defensive instantly, which told me everything I needed to know before she said a single number. The number, when I dragged it out of her, was most of what we'd saved. The deposit on the villa alone had already gone through, from the joint account, the one I funded by myself. I asked her straight if this was a separation or a divorce. She said she didn't want to put labels on it. The universe would decide. The universe didn't put down a deposit on a villa, I told her. I did. That landed wrong, and the conversation ended there. I didn't sleep that night. Lay there doing math in my head, the way I do when everything else is falling apart, and numbers are the only thing that holds still. Part of me kept waiting for her to come in and say she didn't mean it. She didn't come in. The next morning she made coffee and talked about her packing list like the night before hadn't happened. That, more than anything, was when I understood she was actually leaving. She left a few days later. I drove her to the airport because that's the kind of idiot I am. The whole ride she scrolled her phone and talked about how excited she was, like I was a coworker dropping her off, not the husband she was leaving. At the curb she hugged me, but it was a polite hug, the kind you give someone who's retiring. She'd hugged the dog longer that morning. I'm not being dramatic. I timed it in my head without meaning to. Watched her walk into the terminal with 2 suitcases and a tote bag full of crystals. And then I drove home to a house that was suddenly way too quiet. I sat in the driveway a long while before going in. The house looked the same. It just wasn't anymore. The first few weeks were bad. I'll be honest about that part because pretending otherwise would be a lie. I didn't eat right. I'd come home, stand in the kitchen, and not know what to do with my hands. The dog kept going to the door waiting for her. That part actually got to me more than anything she'd said. Her stuff was everywhere. Half-empty bottles of expensive nothing in the bathroom. A closet full of clothes she didn't take. I didn't touch any of it. Some part of me was still standing there waiting for her to walk back in and say she'd come to her senses. One night, I caught myself setting 2 plates out of pure habit and just stood there holding the second one like an idiot. Work got sloppy. I'd stare at the same line of a report for an hour and absorb none of it. A couple of nights I drove past restaurants we used to go to and then just kept driving because going in alone felt worse than not eating. The worst was the silence. You don't realize how much noise another person makes in a house until it's gone. No footsteps, no humming, no shower running, just me and the dog and the refrigerator. I told almost nobody at first. Felt like admitting it out loud would make it permanent, which is backwards. But that's where my head was. When people at work asked about her, I'd just say she was traveling. Technically true. My family found out slowly. My mother called once she pieced it together and asked what I'd done. Not what happened, what I'd done. Even my own corner of the world had absorbed the idea that if a marriage ends, the man must have broken it somehow. I stopped explaining after a while. The hardest stretch was the second month, oddly, not the first. The first you're in shock and running on adrenaline. By the second the adrenaline's gone, and it's just the long, flat reality of an empty bed and a life that used to have a shape. Meanwhile, she was posting. Of course she was posting. Sunsets, beaches, her hand holding a coconut, captions about healing and coming home to herself. Devin showed up in the background of a lot of them, then in the foreground. Then it was just the two of them at every yoga session, every sound bath, whatever that is. She looked happy, genuinely happy. And I'm sitting in our kitchen eating cereal over the sink for the third night in a row. That comparison nearly took me out. Scrolling her feed at midnight became a habit I'm not proud of. I'd look at those photos and do the cruel thing, the comparison where she's glowing on a beach and I'm a guy in a dim kitchen who can't remember the last time he laughed. What saved me, and I mean that literally, was a buddy from work. Good guy. Saw I was circling the drain and didn't give me a speech, didn't tell me to process my feelings. He just showed up one evening, told me to put shoes on, and drove me to the gym he goes to. I hated it. I was weak, out of shape, embarrassed to be the guy huffing on the easiest setting, while everyone around me looked like they knew what they were doing. But it was somewhere to be that wasn't the empty house, so I kept going. 3 times a week became 4. 4 became almost every day. Not because I had some big transformation planned, mostly because lifting something heavy was the only thing that quieted my head for an hour. The first month, I saw nothing, just sore and tired and slightly less hollow than before. Then small things. Stairs stopped winding me, shirts fit different. I caught myself in a mirror one day and didn't immediately look away. My buddy never made it weird. He'd just nod when I hit something I couldn't do the month before, and that was enough. One evening over a protein shake, he told me, not unkindly, that the version of me that married her wasn't coming back, and that was probably for the best. I didn't love hearing it. He was right. He'd been through his own divorce a few years back, so when he talked, it wasn't theory. He told me the trick was to stop trying to win her back in my head and start building something she wasn't part of. Took me a while to actually do it, but the idea stuck. The gym bled into other things the way these habits do. Started cooking real meals so the training wasn't wasted. Started going to bed at a normal hour. Cut the late night scrolling, mostly because I was too tired to do it. People at work noticed before I did. Somebody asked if I'd had time off, said I looked rested. I'd never been less rested in my life. I just looked like a person again, instead of a guy slowly dissolving over a sink. I started sleeping again. Started actually tasting food. The fog lifted a degree at a time, not all at once. The work stuff started around the same stretch. There was a project at my company everyone had been avoiding for over a year. Ugly, tangled, the kind of thing that ends careers if it goes wrong. Before all this, I'd have passed on it too. I had a comfortable life. Why risk it? But I didn't have a comfortable life anymore. I had empty evenings and absolutely nothing to lose. So I took it. Walked into my boss's office and told him I'd own it. He looked at me like I'd volunteered to defuse a bomb, but he said yes, probably because nobody else would. I poured everything into it. The hours I used to spend with Skylar, the hours I used to spend wondering what she wanted from me, all of it went into that project. For the first time in years, I felt useful in a way that didn't involve apologizing for an energy I couldn't see. There was a stretch in the middle where the whole thing nearly fell apart. A core piece failed in testing, and I spent the better part of a week certain I'd torpedoed my own career on purpose. Solved it at the kitchen table at 2 a.m, dog asleep under my chair, no one to tell. Wrote it up, went to bed, fixed it for real the next day. Late nights at the office stopped feeling lonely and started feeling like progress. There's a difference, and I'd forgotten it existed. When it finally shipped, a couple of the executives wanted to know who'd driven it. My boss told them. For the first time in years, somebody with real pull at the company knew my name for a good reason. The strange thing was how quiet the win felt. No one at home to tell. I sat with that for a minute and then realized I didn't need someone to validate it for it to be real. That was new for me. A couple of months into her trip, the tone of her posts shifted. The captions got a little harder to read between the lines. Less I'm so free and more some people aren't ready for my growth. The villa, it turned out, cost more than she'd planned, because of course it did. Devin, the coach, had a new offering, some premium program, a higher tier of enlightenment for a higher price naturally. She bought in. I found this out later, but she put real money into his program, money we no longer had a shared pile of, so it was hers to burn, and burn it she did. The friend who'd talked her into the whole journey went quiet around then too. That woman had landed herself a new man, a guy with money, and lost interest in the single women's empowerment crusade the second she didn't need it. Funny how fast the sisterhood empties out when one of them's got a wedding to plan and you've got a coach to pay. Skylar was out there alone, basically surrounded by people she was paying to like her. Back home, my project landed. It worked, better than worked. It saved the company a serious chunk of money and made a couple of executives look very smart to their bosses. The promotion came fast after that. A real one, with a real raise. The kind I'd assumed only happened to other people. I sat in my car in the parking lot after they told me and didn't know whether to laugh or call somebody. There was nobody to call, so I just drove home. For the first time in months, the quiet house didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like mine. That night I cooked a real dinner for one and didn't eat it standing up. Small thing. Felt enormous at the time. With the raise and the savings I'd been quietly rebuilding, I did something I'd been turning over for a while. I bought a house. A real one. With a yard. Not the cramped place Skylar and I had rented for years and called ours. The day I got the keys, I walked through every empty room by myself, and the silence felt completely different than the silence in the old place. Same, quiet, opposite feeling. One was loss. This one was room to grow into. Moved out of the old apartment. Boxed up the stuff she'd abandoned and dropped it at her mother's, who I was still on decent terms with. The new place needed work, and that was perfect, because the work gave me something to do with my hands every weekend instead of thinking. I retiled the bathroom myself, watched videos, ruined the first few tiles, got it right by the end. Fixed the sagging fence, rehung a door that had never closed straight for the previous owner. Tore out a dead flower bed and put in a vegetable garden, mostly tomatoes because they're hard to kill, and I needed an easy win. The dog loved the new yard, spent whole afternoons patrolling it like he'd been promoted to head of security. Those first months in the house, working on it room by room, were honestly some of the steadiest I'd felt in years. There's something about fixing a thing with your hands and watching it actually stay fixed. No moving goalposts, no hidden energy to apologize for. A crooked door is crooked until you fix it, and then it's just done. Started posting a little, not bragging, just pictures of the house, the garden, the dog asleep in a sunbeam on the new porch. No captions about healing, no coconuts, just a guy and his stuff and a quiet that finally felt earned instead of empty. Skylar saw them. I know she did, because one of them got a like from her at 3 a.m, her time. 3 a.m. Healing, apparently, keeps strange hours. I didn't react, didn't message her, just let the like sit there and went back to staking my tomatoes. Around the half-year mark, things really turned for her. The coach, Devin, did what guys like that always do. He moved on to a newer student, younger arrival to the retreat scene, fresh enthusiasm, full wallet, the whole package she'd been a few months earlier. Skylar was suddenly old news in her own love story. She'd flown across the world, drained the savings, paid into his program, rearranged her entire existence around this man, and he dropped her the moment a better paying option walked in. Now, here's the part I think about more than I should. She'd spent a year of our marriage lecturing me about toxic men, about emotional unavailability, about guys who use women and discard them. The first genuinely toxic man she ever let near her, she handed her whole life to, no questions asked, because he said the right soft words in the right soft voice. The calm husband who paid every bill and never once mistreated her got labeled toxic. The smooth stranger who took her money and ghosted her in a foreign country got called her soulmate, right up until the day he wasn't. I'd love to tell you she saw the irony. I really don't think she did, not then. She was stranded, money mostly gone, friend gone, coach gone, alone in a place where everyone she knew had been on a payroll she could no longer meet. From what trickled back to me, she spent a while down there refusing to admit it had gone wrong, posting like everything was still part of the plan. Eventually, even the posts dried up. Hard to caption a sunset as growth when you're checking the price of the cheapest flight home, and the answer is still too much. A mutual acquaintance who was out there for a while told me later what the end of it looked like for her. The retreat crowd doesn't stick around once you can't pay the entry fee. The community that finally got her right up until the card stopped working. She'd apparently tried to make a go of being a coach herself out there, run her own little sessions, but you can't sell a map to a place you're clearly lost in. Nobody bit. By the end, she was the woman at the edge of other people's photos, the one who used to be a regular and now just sort of lingered, and even that acquaintance felt bad enough to mention it unprompted. Now back to me, because the two timelines were running side by side this whole time, hers sinking and mine, for once, climbing. The new house came with neighbors, and one of them was a woman named Hazel. Nothing dramatic about how we met. She'd grown more tomatoes than she could use and brought a basket over because she'd seen my sad little garden just getting started. We got to talking over the fence, then over coffee. Then it just kind of kept happening on its own. Hazel is the opposite of complicated. She says what she means. She laughs at my dumb engineer jokes, the ones Skylar used to sigh at like they cost her something. Not once did she try to fix me or hunt for the hidden toxic energy supposedly leaking out of my soul. Took me a while to trust it, honestly. When you've spent years being told you're secretly a problem, someone just liking you as you are feels like a setup at first. Our first real time out together, I caught myself bracing the whole evening, waiting for the moment she'd start listing what was wrong with me. It never arrived. She just asked about my work and seemed to actually want the answer. But it wasn't a setup. It was a normal woman being normal, which I'd apparently forgotten was even on the menu. We took it slow, cooked together. She helped me stake the tomatoes and laughed at how seriously I took it. The dog adored her from minute one, and that animal has better instincts than I do, so I figured he was onto something. For a long time, I kept waiting for the catch, the moment she'd turn and start cataloging my flaws. It never came. There just wasn't a catch. Somewhere in there, I stopped checking Skylar's feed at night. Not as a decision, really. I just had better things to do with my evenings, and one day I realized I hadn't looked in weeks. What got me with Hazel was how little she demanded and how much she gave anyway. She'd notice when I was wound up about work and just hand me a coffee and let me be quiet about it. No interrogation, no theory about what it said about my inner child. We argued sometimes, normal stuff, where to eat, whose turn it was to deal with the dog at 6 in the morning. The difference was that an argument with her ended, and we were fine. Nobody filed it away as evidence for a case against me. One night I told her, kind of cautiously, about the whole toxic energy thing Skylar used to say. Hazel just looked at me and said that if quietly paying every bill and never yelling was toxic, she'd take all the toxic men she could get. Then she went back to her crossword. That was that. Sometime that stretch, Skylar finally scraped together a cheap flight and came back to the city. She couldn't afford much, ended up in a small studio on the other side of town, the kind of place we'd have called a starter apartment a decade earlier. The first thing she did was go to her mother for money. I heard about this from the mother herself, since we'd stayed friendly. Her mother said no. Not just no. She apparently told Skylar, in plain words, that she'd walked out on a good man who never did a thing to deserve it, chasing a candle and a stranger, and now she could sit in the consequences for a while. That's a cold thing to hear from your own mother. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. The thing is, her mother had warned her before she ever left, told her she was throwing away something steady for a fantasy. Got called controlling for the trouble, same word I always got. Turns out the people calling everyone else toxic and controlling were usually just describing anyone who told them no. Her mother and I still talk now and then. She apologized to me once, which she didn't need to do. Wasn't her marriage that fell apart. She just wanted somebody to say sorry to me, I think, since her daughter never would. What I gathered between what her mother let slip and what got back to me was that the homecoming wasn't the soft landing Skylar pictured. She'd left as the brave woman finding herself and came back as the woman who'd blown the savings on a man in another time zone. The story didn't sound as good at the kitchen tables back home. The friends who'd cheered her on from the sidelines were busy with their own lives by then. Empowerment is fun to like on a screen. Lending someone rent money after they emptied their accounts, chasing it is a different thing, and nobody lined up for that part. She spent a while, from what I heard, telling anyone who'd listen that I'd changed, that I'd gotten cold, that I wasn't the man she married, which was true, I wasn't. She'd made very sure of that the morning she hugged the dog goodbye and barely looked at me. Things kept getting better on my end, which I know sounds like I'm rubbing it in, but I'm just telling you the order it happened in. Hazel and I made it official. I threw a barbecue at the new place to introduce her to my friends properly. Telling her about the marriage, the real version, took me a couple of tries. I was braced for her to get weird about the ex who was clearly still floating around out there. She didn't. Just said it sounded like I'd had a rough run, and she was glad I came out the other side of it. No drama, no 20 questions, no scorecard. The work buddy who dragged me to the gym was there, giving me grief the entire afternoon. My boss swung by for a beer. The yard filled up. The grill ran for hours. The dog made his rounds stealing food off plates. I stood there at one point with a plate in my hand and realized I was laughing. Actually laughing, not the polite version. First time in over a year that it came out without me deciding to do it. Somebody took a group photo and I posted it. House, friends, Hazel, the whole thing in one frame. The comments were mostly my buddies roasting me, plus a few of them flat out saying I looked like a different man than the one they'd seen the year before. Skylar saw that one too. I know because she deactivated her account for a day right after, then quietly turned it back on, like nobody would clock it. The studio, the empty account, the ex-husband clearly thriving in a house she'd never set foot in. I can picture exactly how that one scrolled past her at midnight. Then, near the end of that year, the message came. I was at the kitchen table when the phone buzzed. Hazel was across from me, doing a crossword. I almost didn't open it. It was Skylar, a long one. The longest thing she'd written me since the candle night. She said she'd been on a journey, that she'd grown so much, that she finally understood what really mattered, and it wasn't sunsets or coaches. She said she missed our life, missed me, missed what we built together. Then the actual ask, buried near the bottom, where she thought it would read as casual. She wanted to come home, to talk about us, to try again. She reminded me, in case I'd forgotten, that we were technically still married on paper. I read it twice. Hazel asked if everything was okay. I told her the old life was knocking on the door. She asked if I was going to answer it. I said yeah, but not the way it was hoping. I sat on it for a day, not because I was tempted, because I wanted to get the wording right, since this was the only message I'd ever send her that actually counted. Here's roughly what I wrote back. I told her I was glad she went looking for herself, because from where I sat, it sounded like she found her. The woman she found was broke, single, living in a studio, and texting her ex at the end of the year, hoping he'd undo the choice she'd fought so hard to make. I told her I hoped the two of them were happy together, her and the self she'd finally met after all that travel. And I told her there was no home to come back to. The home she meant didn't exist. She'd never lived in this house. I refinanced it alone, planted that garden alone, built this whole life alone, after she made very sure I would be. Her reply came fast. 2 words and a wall of question marks. After everything we built. That was the part I couldn't let slide. I wrote back that there was no we in any of it. I built. She lit a candle, called me toxic on no evidence, drained our savings, and flew across the planet to hand her life to a man who used her and dropped her. The only thing she ever built was a very expensive route back to exactly where she started, minus the one person who would have actually stayed. She didn't respond to that one. There wasn't really a response to give. The divorce itself was almost boring, which is its own kind of justice. By the time it came around, our finances were already split in practice. She'd emptied the joint account herself on her way out the door. No kids, no shared property she had a real claim to, since the house came after she left, paid for with money I earned after she left. The lawyer told me it was one of the cleanest cases he'd seen. The paper trail did almost all the work. Every withdrawal, every transfer to that coach's program, all of it time-stamped and sitting right there in black and white. I didn't have to fight for a thing. She documented her own exit better than I ever could have. The lawyer actually laughed at one point, going through the statements. Said in 20 years, he'd rarely seen a case argue itself this cleanly. Every dollar that left on her say-so, to places that had nothing to do with me. There was no story to spin where I came out the bad guy, no matter how she framed it to her friends. She didn't show up to the last bit with a lawyer of her own, couldn't really afford one, and there was nothing to contest anyway. Just signatures and a date and the quiet sound of 9 years getting filed into a drawer somewhere. Signing the papers, I felt less than I expected to. Not sad, not triumphant, just done, like finishing a long project that should have wrapped up a year earlier. Last I heard, she's still in that studio. She runs a little workshop now. Something about healing after heartbreak, recovering from a marriage that didn't serve you, that whole flavor of thing. Charges a small fee to attend. Last count, she had 3 people signed up. 3, from the woman who was going to find herself and reinvent her entire existence from the ground up. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it's just what happened, in order, with nobody steering the ship but her. Me? Hazel moved in a little while back. The dog likes her more than the cosmos ever liked Skylar, and I trust that animal's read on people completely. The mortgage gets paid every month on time, by one income that's doing just fine without anyone calling it controlling. The tomatoes came in strong this year. We've got so many we started leaving baskets on the neighbors' porches, the way Hazel once left one on mine. I think about the whole thing less than I used to. For a long time I was angry, mostly at myself, for how much I'd let slide and how long I'd called it loyalty when it was really just fear of rocking the boat. Took me the better part of a year to stop replaying it and asking what I could have done differently. The honest answer is nothing. There was no version of me good enough, because the problem was never a thing I did. The problem was that she decided the steady life was a cage, and once someone decides that, the man holding it together just looks like the bars. People keep telling me I should be bitter about it, like there's a debt out there I'm owed. I'm really not. Bitterness would mean I was still tangled up in her version of events, still arguing the case in my head. I left that courtroom a while ago, but every now and then I remember her sitting across from me with that candle, telling me she had to leave to go find herself. The funny part isn't that she didn't find herself. The funny part is that she did. She found out exactly who she becomes the second nobody's there to hold the whole thing up for her. She just didn't like the answer. That part she threw away to go searching, the steady, boring, reliable part. Turns out that was the part that was working the entire time. Anyway, life's good. The grill's still out back. There's a basket of tomatoes on the counter, and someone in this house who actually wanted to be here. Greater than MFW, she left to find herself, and the only thing she ended up losing was everything that was holding her up.